Okay, well, welcome everybody. I guess we've got who we're going to get. So welcome. Let me welcome you first to the Waterbury Regional Chamber's webinar on teleworking. My name is Dave Kraszewski. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Economic Development. And we are grateful to have this webinar courtesy of CTrides, which is a free program that helps commuters find the best way to get to work or school. Although these days, that best way is probably walking down the stairs to a table in your house and turning on your computer. And that's why we're having this webinar today. We've got two folks with us from the CTrides organization who are going to talk to you about best practices for employers on telecommuting and teleworking. So with us today are Program Director Russell McDermott and Commuter Program Manager Joanne Cavadini, and I'm going to turn it over to them. So thanks, and we appreciate you being here today.
All right, thanks a lot, Dave. I really appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. As Dave said, we're going to be talking about some high-level best practices for teleworking during COVID-19. And when we talk about during COVID-19, we don't just mean right now, but for at least the next several months and beyond. So for the past few months, we've all been dealing with the impacts of COVID-19 in both our personal and professional lives. And the most vivid example of this is the extent to which most of us have had to transition to a full-time telework program. Just as an example, we're doing this webinar over Zoom versus an in-person presentation. Now, being that we're about 3 months into this, I want to focus on a few things today. Number one, the importance of teleworking and why it needs to be part of your company's long-term strategy. Number two, I want to provide some context about what the environment was like prior to COVID-19 and what it looks like now. And the reason for this is so you can see what the larger macro level trends are pointing towards as far as teleworking goes. Number three, the ideal implementation steps for a program. And even though right now we're not in a quote unquote ideal time, most of the steps that we're going to be going over can be applied at any time to really strengthen the foundation of your program. And lastly, we're going to look at why work-life balance is something that you as an employer or people manager really need to be thinking about, especially now when so many people are under an extreme amount of stress and we're facing so much uncertainty, again, not only in our professional but personal lives as well. So let me start off and tell you a little bit about CTrides. Again, we're a program of the Connecticut Department of Transportation, and we're a statewide commuter services program. So we work with both employers and commuters throughout the state with their transportation and commuting challenges. And we do an emphasis on green commuting modes, so everything except driving by yourself. Now, one of the employer services, and really the one that we're going to be focusing on today, is our Telework consultation services. And this is where we help companies to develop, formalize, or expand their existing programs. So right after I do that slide, I always get questions about, well, what does CTrides, or where's the transition from offering commuter services to teleworking is? And our program specialists have well over 30 years of experience doing these telework consultations. And we've been supporting companies throughout the state, local businesses here in Connecticut since the mid-90s with these services. Now, obviously, over the years, our offerings have changed, but we've been doing these consultations for a very long time. And our specialty has always been the rapid deployment and development of these programs. Now, prior to COVID-19, we had our famous winter weather to thank for that. And with that said, we've been using those skill sets to apply to the current crisis that we're in. So I'm a firm believer that whenever we talk about teleworking, we have to start with making the business case. It's really not enough for us to say we need to do this right now because we don't have any other options. While that may be true for many of us, I want you all to look at this through the lens as a long-term business investment. And like any other major business decision, that would always start with making the business case of why do you want to look in telework, and how is this a long-term business decision? And the fact of the matter is, as it stands right now, teleworking is not something employees can just choose to do. It's something that the organization has to offer. So in order for us to promote that long-term growth, of teleworking, we really need to outline the benefits that are associated with remote work programs, and we need to get buy-in from leadership, which many of you on this call represented, that C-suite or leadership within organizations, and that buy-in is a key ingredient for really any sustainable telework program. And I love this quote on the screen because I think it really sums up pretty nicely what businesses are looking for. And it's not just the finances or employee happiness, but it talks about the sustainability and security that teleworking provides to companies. And when you take all of that in totality, it really talks about those fundamentals that companies are looking for when implementing or investing in any program. It just so happens in this case, we're talking about teleworking. So let's do a deeper dive into what some of the benefits associated with teleworking are. And that ultimately ties back into what we were just talking about, which is making that business case. And some of the ones that I want to spotlight are, number one, business continuity. Again, the most recent and vivid example is what's going on right now with COVID-19. What's the value in being able to seamlessly continue your operations in the event of an emergency? And like I said, prior to COVID-19, we could always count on at least one winter storm where we would have some direct or indirect impacts on our business operations. So again, business continuity has always been, at least in the Northeast, and with what's going on right now, one of those primary benefits associated with having a teleworking program. The next one is increased productivity. Study after study shows that teleworkers are shown to be significantly more productive than their in-office counterparts. And in many cases, we're talking about double-digit percentage points. And let me tell you, the data on this is pretty conclusive. Recruitment and retention. Prior to COVID-19, I can tell you that the number one issue we heard from all of the companies that we work with across the state was recruitment and retention. And we continue to see survey after survey that say increasingly people are prioritizing work-life balance and flexibility over financial compensation. So the question is, can companies remain competitive for the long term without making teleworking a part of their long-term growth plan and a part of their organization's culture? It contributes towards not only the companies, but frankly, a lot of our own personal environmental goals. And we're seeing a lot of issue and a lot of focus being put on the environment and the impact that we have. And this is just one aspect where commuters and employers have a direct impact on how we address some of those climate challenges that we're seeing. And numerous cost savings for employers. I mean, when you look at everything associated with maintaining a full-time in-office workforce and then comparing those financials to what it costs to have in either a portion of your workforce working remotely, I mean, there's some pretty significant cost savings there that companies need to look at. So let's talk about teleworking before COVID-19. What was the environment like? For obvious reasons, teleworking is getting a lot of attention right now, and that can sometimes blur the line between, our perception of what it is and the reality of what it was really like. So prior to COVID-19, about 5.3% of people in the US worked remotely, and Connecticut has always trended a little bit higher than the national average, just over 5.5%. there's been a massive increase in the number of people who telework over the last 15 years. So if you look in that time span, that growth has been somewhere in the neighborhood of 170%. And that is a huge number in a relatively short period of time when we're talking about these new commutes, if you will, representing work from home. And back in 2017, we quietly crossed a key milestone nationally where you have more Americans who work from home than those who use mass transit. So those are some pretty impressive stats. But what does it all mean for that environment prior to COVID-19? And what that tells us is teleworking was growing at a pretty rapid and significant rate prior to COVID-19. And ever since COVID-19 has happened, we've seen that trend just absolutely take off like a rocket ship. And there were a lot of different factors that contributed to that rapid growth. Things like the new implementation of different technologies, and we saw a big push for that work-life balance come in, especially from the younger generation started to enter the workforce. So I think those are some of the main factors that helped to drive this acceleration over the past decade or so. And if you really take one thing away from this slide, it should be that teleworking is quickly shifting away from that nice to have to where it's becoming a necessity for companies to function and continue to be competitive in the long term. So let's look at our current environment, and I'm sure many of you check at least one of the boxes that are on the screen right now. So most companies were not prepared for the sudden shift to telework, and even those companies who had existing programs had challenges scaling it up to the levels that were necessary when you're transitioning an entire department or frankly an entire company to working from home, whether that was issue with things like your policy or your agreement or training, or technology turned out to be a big one for a lot of companies, especially as it relates to VPN and accessibility and things like that. It really showed us that there's a strong need for things like having a formal policy and agreement in place. Again, it's one thing to let several people on your team or in your company, telework on an ad hoc basis, but it's a completely different thing when you're managing large groups or entire organizations who are working remotely. And the most I think the most important thing we saw, and something that we really need to remember, is that we're not in a normal situation. I think it's important to state that and put that out front. No one was really, or nor could they have been prepared to the extent of what we're going through right now. A lot of people didn't, and they still don't have child or dependent care. And many of you, I know myself included, and your employees are doing double duty in addition to doing your regular jobs. You're also acting as teachers for your children. And we need to remember, people are under a lot of stress right now. They have a lot of uncertainty, again, not only in their professional lives, but also in their personal lives as well. So all of that is going to have an impact on your team members and ultimately your company. So I think it's really important that we always try to remain, especially right now, understanding and try to keep things in perspective. And when we're looking at issues, that we look at it through those frames of just the high level of anxiety that people have right now. And as we begin to enter phase 2 and begin figuring out what that quote unquote return to normal looks like, there's still a high level of uncertainty and anxiety out there. A lot of the issues that we had prior to the shutdown still persist. Your employees still have limited options for childcare. They're still under a lot of stress, as are the managers and owners of the different companies. And on the management side of things, it's still an extremely complicated process about, how do we safely and effectively reopen? And the main takeaway here shouldn't, I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom on this slide, but what I'm trying to point out is all of the challenges that I just listed, they're not insurmountable. And I'm sure most of us already taken different steps to address them, but the main point is to identify and acknowledge the situation that we're all in. And that really in totality is our current environment. It's summed up by a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. And as we operate our businesses, we just need to acknowledge that. So we just discussed that we're not in a normal situation. And as such, we have to adjust as best we can to our current environment. Now, this slide shows what the ideal implementation of a teleworking program looks like. And the key word there is ideal. And of course, we're not in an ideal situation. This should serve as a guide, and it can and should be adjusted based on the situation a company is in. So if you're already in the middle of a teleworking program, which most of us are right now, I still recommend that you use this as a outline, as a guide of some things that you can be doing right now to reinforce your teleworking foundation so you can really maximize the benefits that we talked about earlier. And I'll run through some of these really quickly and what each step covers. So number one, it's selecting a telework coordinator. And that's really just to have one point person who's going to take the lead of whether it's developing a program or rebuilding the foundation or making tweaks to it. You need to have that main person really driving the telework gears on that. The second one, if you don't already, it's a good business process to have that steering committee. And that's really a working group of internal stakeholders. That typically involves your IT team, human resources, management, any other stakeholders who you think should be involved. This is where you get a lot of that feedback and that internal feedback loop process to find out, what are some things that we want to look at or be aware of. Policies and guidelines, I would say this is probably the most consequential step. This is really key to developing a best practices program, which is something that we here at CTrides promote, not just having a telework program, but really taking advantage of those best practices, if you will, which will really allow you to maximize the benefits that are associated with teleworking. And one of the no-cost services that we provide is to provide samples of these policies and agreements. So if this is something you don't have, if you need a copy of it, again, there's no cost, there's no fee. Please give us a call. That's what we're here for, and would be more than happy to provide some of these documents that you can review or use, or if you want to compare your own policies against some of the samples we have. Determining the technologies. Again, this is not as large of a barrier as it used to be, but it's still very important that you have this down packed. Technology is what really facilitates teleworking. So you really need to make sure that you get this right. And a lot of companies found out the hard way when this first started that a lot of the infrastructure that they thought they had in place, they really had trouble, accounting for the massive surge that they had. Employee selection, we're going to do a whole different slide on this after this, but in order to have a successful program, you really need to make sure that you have the right people teleworking. But the main takeaway here is if someone is struggling or if you have an issue in the office, you're going to have that same issue remotely. Again, we'll get into more details on that in the next slide. Training. I would say this is probably the most overlooked aspect of any teleworking program. And in my experience, it's the #1 reason why remote work programs aren't as successful as they could be. I could probably do a full webinar just about training and the importance of it. But when you think about when you manage people, the skill sets associated with it, and then you look on what those skill sets are in person and remotely, they don't always line up equally. And you really need to spend some time, or you should spend some time doing some trainings, not only for the employees who are going to be working remotely, but for managers, new managers, or managers who've never managed people remotely. It's extremely important that they have some level of training of, what to look out for, how to gauge productivity, how to manage expectations, the importance of communication. So again, these are all services that we can provide at no cost. It's available for any company in the States. So again, training is a big part that often gets overlooked. And really, the number 6, assess cost savings. Again, this is going back to the business case. We always want to reinforce the benefits of the programs. And there are a lot of companies out there who have some great success stories, especially here in Connecticut. And for some reason, it's still taboo, or companies are sometimes afraid to brag about the benefits that they've experienced with their program. And just by the nature of, what I do and what CTrides does, I always think it's important for companies to document the benefits and the cost savings and all of the things that go with telework. And because I'm a firm believer, if this is something that we're pushing and we're going to tell you that there are a number of benefits associated with it, there should be some mechanism in place for you to track it and analyze it for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. Analyze your existing programs and make sure that you're getting these benefits. And last but certainly not least is evaluation. Your program really shouldn't be static. It's something that needs to be constantly evaluated to find out what's working, find out what's not working so you can adjust. And then that goes back to assessing those cost savings and ensuring that you're maximizing the benefits associated with these programs. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're in a pretty unique situation where most of us have had to implement teleworking across the board, if we have that opportunity. But as far as best practices go, and when things start to return to normal, it's important for you to have a formal selection criteria. When I say this, it really shocks a lot of people, but teleworking is not for everyone. And when you're selecting people to telework, they should really meet certain performance and behavior criteria or factors, which should be outlined in your policy. And sometimes this can be a little tricky to lock down, but there are different tools like the employee self-nomination form or a manager selection checklist. I've described both on the screen there. And that will really help to guide you through the process. And it's going to outline things or specify different things that you want to look at when you're selecting employees to telework. Things like time management. Does a person manage their time effectively? Do they prioritize work appropriately? Self-motivation. Do they work with minimal direction? Do they address problems and implement effective solutions? Do they have self-discipline? What are their communication skills look like? Communication is so important when teleworking. Does the individual who's teleworking, do they meet their goal and objectives? What's their organizational skills look like? Technical competency, again, technology is a backbone of teleworking, and you want to make sure that the people who you do have teleworking, they're going to have those basic skills. And one of the things I always say is teleworking really accentuates both the good and maybe the not so good in different individuals who telework. So again, if somebody is a rock star at work and they're always meeting their goals and objectives, and you don't have any issues with them, and you can communicate with them easily, odds are those skill sets are going to be amplified when teleworking. But again, it can go the other way. So when we get back to whatever the new normal looks like, and we're looking at implementing this on more of a full-time basis, I think it's really important that we spend some time and resources into how you make those employee selections to figure out, who's going to continue telework. And again, I'm looking at this past the immediate future and looking at it 6 months or a year or 5 years, 10 years from now, because what we're promoting here is the best practices and the long-term sustainability of having a telework program. Now I want to spotlight the importance of having policies and guidelines. And I understand that this isn't the fun or exciting part of telework. And when you see the commercials and the different things advertising it, and in Silicon Valley, they don't really talk about, okay, let's get into the guidelines and the agreements and the policies. But this stuff is really important, and these things are there to really protect you as the employer, and also to protect your employees. So it's extremely important that you get this stuff right and you look at it before you run into have any issues. The same thought process that you would have to any in-person program or business policy, you really want to provide that same level of effort to your remote work program. And what these agreements and policies are going to do, it's going to allow you to quickly scale up your programs in an organized way. Again, it's one thing when you have several people doing it ad hoc, but again, it's another thing once you start expanding it for whole departments and entire companies. It makes the program sustainable, and this is going to help you to maximize the benefits associated with telework. And again, instead of looking at the current situation as a one-off, you really want to be looking at how does this become part of the solution, not only during, but after COVID-19. And again, part of the service that we offer is to help you develop these policies and guidelines that's going to work for your team and work for your organization. So even though most of you on this call are employers, that also makes you people managers. And it's important for you to understand what your team members who are teleworking want from you. I'm only going to go over a few of the key bullets, but accessibility, they want to know that you're there. If they have an issue, they can reach out and find you. Clarity. You need to be 100% clear and direct with what your expectations and requests are. Ambiguity does not work in telework, and people can't read nonverbal cues when you're teleworking, unless maybe you're on video, and even then you still lose some of that ability. So you have to be clear and direct. Again, you can't be ambiguity, you can't be going around the sides. Frequent communication. But with that being said, you need to differentiate between frequent communication and not micromanaging, and that's where the training part comes in. So everything really feeds off one another. Honesty. If there's an issue, you need to tell them. This is something that we see especially with new managers, where they're afraid of confrontation. I wouldn't even call it confrontation. You want to make it as productive as possible. But if there's an issue, you need to address it, especially when you're working remotely. And flexibility, again, manage based on results, not proximity. The one question I hear all the time from managers is, how do I know if my employees are working if I can't see them? If we're not in the office, how do I know they're doing what they're supposed to? And the answer I always give is that people can waste time just as easily in the office as they can at home, and the data just doesn't support that question. Again, it's pretty much as conclusive as it can be that by and large, when you have the right people teleworking, you are going to see that significant increase in productivity. So what do managers want? And we have a lot of managers on the call, and I'm sure that you would agree with most, if not all, of these boxes. But a few of the examples I'll point out is, first and foremost, is the job getting done? I mean, we can point to all of the good things and the soft stuff associated with teleworking, but at the end of the day, as a company or an organization, you want to know, is the job getting done? You want to be kept informed about what's going on. Managers and people managers and business leaders, they don't like surprises. We want to be kept informed. And last but not least, the one I'll point out is that adherence to policy. If you have that policy and agreement in place, you want to make sure and you want to feel good in the knowledge of knowing that your team members are following it and adhering to it. And if I really had to boil down both lists down to what I believe are the most important points, it would be probably the clear and direct communication, the honest feedback, and the accessibility. Now, before I turn it over to Joanne, I want to leave you with this slide. As you continue on this journey, remember that teleworking is like anything else in your organization. You have to plan for success. It's not just going to happen where, let's just let everyone do everything they want to do and hopefully it'll be successful. You really have to take some time and plan for it and work towards it. And that's when you're really going to start to maximize and realize a lot of those benefits associated with teleworking. So acting on problems as they arise, again, if you see an issue, address it quickly and move on. Be honest. Again, this goes back to that clear and direct communication. Asking for input. It's a good idea to get an input from, your coworkers, your team members, the employees, so you have that feedback loop. Remember that there's an adjustment period. There's going to be adjustments for not only employees, but managers. But keep in mind, things get better. Whenever you're trying something new, it is going to be rocky. And I think now, albeit it's that we're in phase 2, from my experience with the companies that we're working with, they're starting to find their footing and really doing some of these things to build out their teleworking foundation. And number 5, again, these feedback loops are going to be absolutely critical for the continued development of your program. So now I want to turn this over to Joanne, who's going to talk about why work-life balance is no longer just an employee issue or personal issue, but this is a business issue that you really need to be aware of. So Joanne?
Thank you, Russell. Hi, everyone. So you may be wondering, how does the work-life balance of my employees benefit my business? Or why is it important to have a team with well-balanced work-life roles? So overwhelmingly, it's been shown that by supporting the work-life balance of your team members, your business will benefit. When you have a robust work-life balance program, it can result in improved recruitment and retention, reduced absenteeism, and promote increased productivity. Also, it offers your employees the benefits of reduced job stress, improved job satisfaction, and it provides them with a better sense of health and well-being, which results in tangible benefits for your company. While it's not required for all businesses to have a work-life balance program, your team members will definitely benefit and by you offering guidance and assistance, and your employees working from home will most definitely benefit from a work-life balance program. So when we discussed work-life balance for teleworkers in the past, it was about a few select positions with responsibilities that had a skill set that was ideal for working from home. But with most of your workforce suddenly working from home, including most of you that are here today, I'm sure, the issues surrounding work-life balance have grown. And this has significantly impacted our daily business practices and forced us to learn a lot about the need for flexibility. For many of us, our roles have been challenged in ways they've never been challenged before. So for some, our homes were suddenly turned into schools for our children as well as our workplace. For other, they're sharing office space with their spouse. And we've had to navigate this process of telework with no time to prepare and to have a work-life balance program may not have been on your radar, or if you had a robust work-life balance program, it may not have included telework. And to make things even more interesting, very soon we may be phasing into a return to the office, and we may be transitioning over to a combination of some telework and some on-site work, depending on your organization, and that could just complicate work-life balance even more. So honestly, even the best situations, work-life balance can be a concern when employees are working from home. But with the COVID crisis, it's been even more challenging. But with careful planning and dedication, telework could support the balance of work and family life for your employees. So, well, keeping in mind that there's not a one-size-fits-all process associated with navigating work-life balance while teleworking, based on your business culture, there will be differences in how each business manages this process. So, as well, there'll be differences on how each employee manages both their work and their family roles. So how we navigate potential pitfalls can be the key to telework being a benefit for strengthening our business. From a work-life balance perspective, we often talk about boundaries. So when working from home, it's even more important to understand and maintain boundaries. Being aware of the boundaries your employees are dealing with can help maintain your business practices. It's in work-life balance, we discuss physical boundaries, and physical boundaries are probably the most significant boundary when we're talking about productivity, and that's our office space. It's essential to highlight the importance of having a designated workspace and that impact on our role balance. So I realize this could be easier said than done when everyone was told with just a moment's notice that they'd be working from home. But even if it's a corner of the office or your dining room or your living room, set up as closely as possible to look like and resemble your office desk, it can really help with continuity. And it also provides continuity and performance for your employees. The next boundary we're dealing with are social boundaries, and these are our role boundaries. And these can be a bit easier to manage when we're at the office, but when working from home, it can be a little harder to navigate, and it can get a little blurry, and this is especially true for the newly teleworking employees. It's important to note that no matter what your team member's living situation is, they have both a work role and a family role. And having clearly defined boundaries are important. There's definitely a learning curve to maintaining this separation, and there may be some difficulties in transitioning between these roles. But by providing your team with guidance and on your expectations, you can avoid those work interruptions. So to assist your business continuity with work-life balance programs or programming, you should really address scheduling boundaries. When you're discussing schedule with your teleworkers, it should also include your expectations about your employees' availability and any potential room for flexibility. Flexibility is often seen as one of the greatest benefits to work and home role balance. However, it comes with many potential pitfalls for your business. So you want to encourage your team members to avoid too much crossover while balancing each role effectively. And during this pandemic, we've definitely seen our role boundaries blur, and they've definitely been challenged. Family role overload has really become a concern. I'm sure no one expected to be setting up their children's distance learning while navigating the mute and unmute during a Zoom meeting. One of the greatest concerns for teleworking employees just a few months ago, you would have been looking at work role overload, which occurs when an employee uses too much of their personal time on work-related tasks, which as managers, that can be really appealing initially, but ultimately will end up with an employee resulting in burnout. So, but with the COVID crisis, we've definitely seen that shift. And I think our employees are dealing a little bit more with the family role overload when it comes to working from home. So understanding that it can occur is the best means for prevention. It can be helpful to encourage your team members to reach out to the telework coordinator if they need support. This also highlights the importance of having a telework coordinator, as Russell had discussed earlier. By supporting your employees to work towards the proper balance of your work and family role, we can avoid lost productivity as well as employee burnout. So now we're going to look and shift over to the benefits of a healthy workforce. So there's a definite connection between healthy employees and a healthy business. Healthy team members have less absenteeism, you end up with lower insurance costs, and most of the time, healthy employees are more productive. Meeting goals for health promoting behaviors can be easier for your employees when they're working from home. Simply having control over their environment combined with the time saved by not commuting can allow your employees to engage in healthy behaviors. A few things to watch out for when working from home. We may not have those social cues to move. They're eliminated when we eliminate our commute. So it's helpful to encourage employees to take mini breaks throughout the day. These mini breaks are not necessarily for our fitness, but for our brains. If we don't stop and take a break, our brains will usually go ahead and take that break for us, and that will have a direct impact on business productivity and the performance of your employees. And this can become even worse when we're not leaving the house. And then also it's important to encourage your team to step outside for a breath of fresh air. Maybe even as long as social distancing is practiced, or perhaps a mini meditation, just stepping away from the desk can be helpful. Recently, our organization began offering 10-minute mini meditation sessions on Teams during lunch, and these have been so helpful for so many of us. Another employee wellness concern that can be an issue for teleworking is maintaining social connections. This is an important part of office culture that can get lost when your employees are teleworking. So fostering social connections results in a more engaged team, and again, increases productivity and results in job satisfaction. So socialization also often provides us with an opportunity for team members to discuss ongoing projects or even just decompress. And teleworking just doesn't provide that same social connection that we have in the traditional workplace. So you can simply encourage employees to connect through technology, a Zoom coffee break, a team virtual event, even a phone call. And then finally, maintaining wellness appointments. And, you know, we all know that participating in preventive care appointments is an important part of health and well-being. While it can be different for each organization depending on schedule and flexibility, teleworking can make it easier for team members to schedule these appointments. And this is especially true now that most doctors' offices are offering some version of telemedicine. So all of these practices make it easier to maintain a healthy lifestyle for our workforce. And then, as we discussed earlier, a healthy workforce is directly associated with a healthy business. So while we're all aware of the costs associated when our employees are not working to their full capacity, what we may not realize is this is often a work-life balance issue. It can impact costs, absenteeism, punctuality, and performance. By being aware that work-life balance can directly impact your business and providing clear direction and guidance for each employee, especially those teleworking, you can avoid much of the potential loss of performance when your team is working from home. So to wrap it up with just a few highlights, if managed correctly, telework can reduce stress for team members, making work-life balance program a part of that can make it even easier. And in turn, promote job satisfaction, a positive work environment for your employees to thrive, which could result in increased productivity, benefiting your bottom line. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Russell for a few closing remarks.
All right, thanks, Ryan. I think you made some really great points. You had some great observations. You know, it really shows that there's that direct correlation that shows, you know, an employee's happiness and health and well-being, that has a direct impact on the organization's bottom line. So great information there. And to really wrap everything up, I've tried to consolidate some of the characteristics of what we've gone over today into one slide of what those are as it relates to a successful telework program. The first is top level commitment. Again, this is something, you know, that goes back to the business case. It goes back to the benefits. You really want to have that buy-in from senior leadership and upper level management. And the only way you're going to do that, again, is going back to that business case and the benefits. You know, I'm a firm believer that teleworking at the end of the day is a business decision, and you need to find out if it makes sense for your company. With all the benefits that we went through, I personally think that the vast majority of companies could implement some form of it. The second one is the planning and selection process. You know, when we start getting back to whatever this new normal looks like, and we start going back into the office, and especially those of us who are just starting to telework, or this is the first time we've ever done it to this extent, I strongly recommend that you take a look at some existing agreements and policies and really look on your selection process. You really want to make sure that you have the right people in the right places, so you're positioning not only them but your company for success. So you really want to take a long, hard look at that selection process and do some planning for that. Plan for access and communication. Again, that goes back to technology and communication. You want to make sure that you have the infrastructure in place to support your program, and you want to make sure that your managers and your employees understand what's required of them as far as that communication, that clear and concise and direct communication. Flexibility. Your program has to be flexible. Like I said, even companies that had existing programs were not really prepared for what we're going through now. If the one thing that every company had in common over the past few months is some level of difficulty trying to adjust to this new normal. So if there's one thing we've learned from this, it's the importance of having a program that can be flexible and scalable. Fits your organization's culture. This is a big one. There is no one size fits all for as far as a telework program goes. Your program has to address the unique needs and situations of your company and frankly your company's culture. And no one knows that better than you all on this call. So while we can provide a lot of different services and we can work with you through the process of developing a program, there is no one size fits all program that, you know, we are really anyone can give you to say, here is X, no, you're going to have a great program. Again, you want to customize it to make sure that what you want to get out of the program, your program is going to support that. So again, customization, making sure that it fits your organization and its culture is very important. And expandable. Like I said, I'm a firm believer that once you see the benefits and the results of the program, in the vast majority of cases, you're going to want to start to looking at how you can expand it and continue to reap those benefits. So when you're looking at stuff like your agreements and your policies, you always want to frame it in a way where it's not limiting you, it's providing you that ability to expand on an as needed basis. So with that being said, I want to thank you all again for joining us today. If you have any questions, you'd like to use any of our services, again, it's completely free. There's no cost. Please visit us at CTrides.com, or you could email us at info@CTrides.com. We would be more than happy to help you through any of the questions or challenges or anything like that you're having. So I'll turn it back over to David, and thank you for having us.
Well, thank you. The presentation was great. Thanks to you, Russell, and Joanne for all that great information. So if anyone has a question and they want to unmute themselves, they are welcome to do that and ask the question. We do have a couple that I can throw out there to get things started if you like. One of the questions that we considered before the event was, there are some people who just aren't able to work from homes. So how does a company deal with perhaps some jealousy among coworkers where, some workers are able to work from home and others aren't?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, I think it goes back to that selection process. Again, we're in a unique situation now, but I'll go back to best practices.
Mhm.
That's where that policy and agreement and those selection criteria and checklists are really going to provide coverage, not only for the employee, but also for the company. And that's why we have two different ones. There's the manager's selection checklist, where they can look in an objective way at different criteria that each person that's being considered to work from home, they have to meet that criteria, and it really needs to be objective. And then on the flip side of that, one of the things that we had back on our slide was a self-nomination form, and that really forces every employee that if they would like to be considered for that, they have to answer a certain, several questions. And it can be like, why do you think that you would be a good candidate for this? And how do you intend on addressing, prompt communication? And does your previous work history support your responses? So again, that's where all of these things from the selection criteria to the policy and agreements, they all tie back together. And I think once you have that, then you can have that honest conversation with each person as to why they can work from home and why they're not being able to work from home. And that's how you address that jealousy. One of the things that we've seen with, in our many years of doing this is it's when you just have no criteria and you let person A work from home, and then the same person who may be performing just as well, you say, well, you can't work from home, and you really have nothing backing you up to say, this is why I allowed that person. So that's how you have it. And the third thing that ties into it is that clear and direct communication. If there's an issue with someone where they're not being allowed to work from home, that conversation shouldn't be happening when they first apply. They should know that there's an issue long before they have that conversation, because it should be addressed. So again, everything that we've gone into, I know there's a lot of parts to it, but everything really ties into each other. But great question.
Okay, well, I do have another one, and that is, do you see benefit? It's kind of difficult to ask this question in the middle of a pandemic and where a lot of people are working from home on a regular basis. But let's say we're back and everything's at the new normal, whatever that's going to be. Do you see some benefits in allowing some workers to work at home, say, for part of the week?
Yeah, I see a tremendous amount of benefit. I think, there's been a lot of attention being given to a lot of companies who said that they're shifting 100% to their employees working from home full time. But I think realistically, by and large, most companies are going to have a hybrid situation where you have some people working from home, maybe 1 or 2 days a week, and splitting their time doing that and then back at the office. Now, there's a lot of things that you will still need your traditional office environment for. So I think it's important to frame things in that context. And I'll tell you, the number one surprise that I have that I've seen in these different presentations and talking with different companies and commuters is that there are a lot of people who are actually looking, who you would think would want to work from home 100%, who are actually starting to look forward to get back into the office just to have some sense of normalcy and that sense of community and organization. So me personally, I think the vast majority of what we'll see is an increase in that hybrid model where people are working from home some of the times, and then, for a couple of days they're back in the office.
Okay. Well, I think we're getting close to having to wrap it up. I don't know if we have any final questions. I guess we do have one final question, and that is, you send your employees, they're all home to work, but they all have different technological situations. Some Wi-Fi may be better than others. Some may have better computer, at home than others. So what's the responsibility of the company to try to level the playing field for all their employees, at least as far as technology is concerned?
That's a good question. That is unique to every company, but I will say this, in your policy or in your telework agreement, you want to have some minimum technical standards or qualifications that an employee needs to have when they're working from home. Now, again, we're in a unique situation where I'm sure most of us just had to get people back to work remotely. Going into the office wasn't an option for a lot of us on the call. But work with your IT department, or if not, again, that's one of the services we offer, where we have some of our IT specialists that can go in and help you develop those IT requirements. So if you're going to have your team members working remotely, if you have to access large files or a VPN system, have that spelled out so that when they are working remote, they know what they need to have. And obviously, if they don't have access to that information or those requirements, if that's something that you need to do your job, then unfortunately, then they have to have the ability to work in the office. But again, it keeps time back to you want to have those things in your policy and your agreement. So yeah.
Okay. Well, terrific. Well, listen, Russell and Joanne, thanks very much for this presentation. It was very useful, and we have recorded this session. We did show it over Facebook Live, but it'll be available to watch in the future if people want to refer back to it. You'll find a link up on our website. So we'd like to thank Russell McDermott and Joanne Cavadini and Quisha Jones, all of CTrides. And thanks very much for this webinar. It was very informative, and we appreciate your time today.
Hey, thank you. Have a great one, David.
Thank you. You too. Thanks, everybody, for attending.